Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to It Says What, where JW3 and Limmud come together to bring you unexpected and poignant Jewish content from across the Jewish community every single week. I'm Joe Hyman, the young JW3 programmer, and you're in for a treat this week. If you haven't seen us before, JW3 is the UK's Jewish Community and Arts Centre. We are partnering to bring you this content with Limmud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. There are currently JW3 ways to engage with us. You can join us in the building for a class, performance, or film, or online for a whole series of great education and language classes. Or check out JW3 TV for all of our archival content for a real treat. This series will ask educators, artists, and leaders from across the Jewish community in the UK and abroad to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. You can ask your own questions about the text in the live feed comments, and we'll take some towards the end. I'm delighted to welcome today Zsuzsa Fritz, the coordinator of the Jewish Knowledge Center of the JTC in Budapest, Berlin-Ház, Hungary. She's a Jewish educator who has been active and involved in the Hungarian Jewish community since the 80s. She's also been involved in the JDC Szarvas International Jewish Youth Summer Camp, where she is the Director of Jewish Leadership and Wellbeing. Zsuzsa is one of the establishing board members of the Haver Foundation, a foundation that educates about Judaism and the Holocaust in public schools across Hungary. Incredible. Welcome, Zsuzsa. How are you?
Welcome, Joe. Thank you very much. Going very, very well. I'm really thrilled to be here with you.
We're really
I love
thrilled
JW.
to have you. Very exciting.
Yes.
Wonderful.
I also love the mood.
Yes, we're delighted to have you, JW3 and Limmud. Tell us, what text have you brought today that you're excited about, that makes you feel surprised and makes you say, it says what?
I brought a text from the Talmud, which I'm not an expert of, which I studied with Joel Luri Grishaver many years ago, actually, at Limmud, I think in Oxford. And it really surprised me and it made me interested. So that's what I brought. And brilliant. I also reveal why. Yeah. It's a very interesting text. You will see. So here it is. This is Mishnah Baba Batra, which basically discusses all kinds of business stuff, courtyards, stores, shops, all the stuff that I'm not really interested in at all. I'll be completely honest with you. And when I studied this text, prepared by and discussed and taught by Joel Grishaver, I was really surprised and blown away, and so that's why I brought it. You will see why. So it's about basically opening stores in courtyards, asking the question, who can block someone from opening a store in the courtyard where he lives? So as a neighbor, I can say, I don't want you to open a store here because that disturbs me. So you, as a neighbor, says the Mishnah, can actually block a store from opening, saying that people are coming and going and it's very noisy. I don't want that. But then the Mishnah says, a person, however, may manufacture articles in the courtyard and then take them out and sell them in the market. The neighbors may not block by claiming, the noise of the hammer keeps me from sleeping, the noise of the millstones keep me from sleeping, or the noise of the children keeps me from sleeping. What? How on earth did the children get in here? So that's why, of course, the rabbis of the Talmud ask, how on earth did the children get here? So a whole discussion follows where at a certain point, Rava, one of the major rabbis, comes to the conclusion that the noise of the children in the Mishnah is actually talking about school children who come to the school, to the cheder, to study Torah. He also says that they are studying Torah in the courtyard because there was a tikkun by Yahushua ben Gamla. So what is this? What is the tikkun by Yahushua ben Gamla? So I'll reveal it to you. Yahushua ben Gamla was a high priest in the temple, and he was a very enlightened person, apparently, because he really cared about Jewish education of the kids to Judaism in general. So he brought a series of tikkunim, how to make it better, how to make Jewish education better. Because, and then we go from this discussion about stores into a whole series of discussions on Jewish education. And that's why I love this text, because suddenly I don't have to deal with business. We're going to deal with Jewish education. So how was Jewish education before Yahushua ben Gamla? According to the Torah, you yourself should teach your child. But that was ineffective because, of course, it's boys and fathers. Many boys did not have, unfortunately, fathers. So then they decided, okay, ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. Torah comes from Jerusalem. So let's take all the children up to Jerusalem. That's where they're going to study. Wonderful idea. But who would take the child if the child doesn't have a father? Again, problem. So then they said, okay, then there should be schools, there should be teachers in every prefecture, and the boys will attend school at the age of 15, 16. Now, isn't that a great idea? Not, because 15, 16 is very late for a boy to attend school. We all know they're teenagers, they're rebelling. This is not the time to start education. So then came the tikkun that said there has to be a school in each district so that young kids can attend. Okay, wonderful. So we learned a lot about Jewish education. Now, do we go back to the business part? Not yet, because the Talmud goes on a tangent and shares Rav's thoughts on Jewish education. So Rav says, okay, no children younger than 6 should study, but after 6, they can come to study and you can stuff them with Torah, like an ox. Beautiful. And you can only punish them with a shoelace. How progressive. Actually, I think it is. If you think about the age, it is a progressive thing. No whip, just a shoelace, just kind of symbolic. And then it goes on about student motivation, whether a weak student will take the smart student away from studies or the other way around if they study together. It's amazing. And suddenly in the midst of really business, a lot of business talks, we have chapters after chapters of conversation about Jewish education. But then after this, we return to our debate. And then we come to this text of the Baraita. If the resident of a courtyard wishes to open a business as a mohel, somebody who circumcises, a bloodletter, all type of doctor who just lets your blood, a tannery, or a teacher of children in his house, the residents can block him. So the question rises, what do these people have in common? So of course, a discussion follows about why these people and who are these people, but I'm not interested in that, because suddenly in the midst of this conversation, again, we get tips about Jewish education. So now we have teaching tips from Rava, the other great rabbi, and he says that if the school for the kids is in another town, that they should not be made to go to school to the other town. If in the same town, however, there is another synagogue, they can attend school there. However, if the synagogue is across the river, we cannot make them attend but must hire them a teacher who can teach them in this part of the town. If there is a bridge across the river, however, we can make them attend. But if the bridge is only a plank, no way. You hear this? We're sitting here in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, right? And there's a lot of talking about security and about whether the kids should be made to go to school or they should stay at home and do online education. So all these issues about security of the children. And we're talking here in the Talmud, an ancient conversation that goes into miniature details in the midst of the business, a business chapter, goes into miniature details about the security of school kids. Then it goes on. So now, up until now, it's about the security of the kids. But from now on, it's about the size of the class. So very progressively, Rashi says, even for one child, the town must hire a teacher. But then Rava says, no, 25 should be a minimum for a teacher. If there are more kids than 25, then 2 teachers need to be appointed. And then Rava says, teaching tip number 3, if there is a teacher who teaches reasonably well, and there is a second teacher who can cover much more material accurately in the same time, we do not replace the first with the second, because without competition, the second may grow lazy. So here a little bit, we returned to a business conversation, right? Competition. And I'm not very sure about this part of the text. I'm not really positive that competition is so good for teachers. At least I did not grow up in an environment when teachers and educators were really competing with each other. However, maybe yes, we were. Maybe yes, we are actually competing every time, just a little bit. But then Rava says, teaching tip number 4, if there are 2 teachers and one teaches quickly, but his students make mistakes, and the other teaches slowly, but without mistakes, we appoint a faster teacher who makes mistakes because mistakes correct themselves in time. Is that true? So it made me think a lot. Do mistakes correct themselves over time? I, as a teacher, as an educator, probably have made so many mistakes. And if I think about it, whether those mistakes had any impact, whether the children learned them and now they think that's given and I don't even know, I don't remember who I taught badly or with mistakes. So this is really an important question. Rabbi Dimi says, wrong, we appoint the one who teaches more slowly, but who makes sure that there are no mistakes. And they give here an example, which I didn't bring in the text, which is actually very interesting. From the Tanakh stories, they bring the example of Yoav, the commander-in-chief of King David, who actually made a mistake by killing the male Edomites because he was taught that you have to wipe out Zachar Amalek, which apparently means the male of Amalek, because his teacher taught him wrong and not Zecher Amalek, the memory of such a miniature mistake and so big consequences, right? So this is the proof that Rabbi Dimi brings, basically, that no, the mistakes, don't correct them. Actually, the teacher's mistakes can really cause so much trouble afterwards. So you really have to take care and you have to be sure that the teacher teaches well without mistakes. And then Rava, as a teaching tip 5, says, a teacher of young children, a vinekeeper, a shochet, a bloodletter, and a sofer are all liable to immediate dismissal. So again, what brings these people together? And the general principle is that what brings these people together is that they are really people who should not be making mistakes. They have such a responsibility in their professions, whatever they do, that they are really not to make mistakes. The general principle is that anyone whose mistakes cannot be corrected is liable to immediate dismissal if a mistake is made. says the Talmud, and brings these people together because they have this responsibility. Now, it all comes down to the responsibility of the educator. And that's why this part of the Talmud really talks to me as a Jewish educator. And also today, when at least in my country, in Hungary, educators are really not valued very much, it is really encouraging to read my tradition's ancient thoughts on education, which were actually so important that they took business aside for some time at least. They start a whole conversation on business ethics and courtyards and stores and manufacturing, but then something much more important takes over: the education of their children. The education of their children and all the important details of that. How will they be secure? How will they be taught well? How will they have the best education of all? And that's what matters, even in the stores, even in the courtyards. That was my surprising text.
Thank you so much, Zsuzsa. That text really sums up what It Says What is about, which is really interesting to hear you speak about that text as a moment for you when you were at Limmud and you learned this text at Limmud, and it clicked something in you that said, oh, actually, this text is saying so much more than just business ethics or business practices in Judaism. It goes off in a tangent, and it's so wonderful to see that the tangent, I think tangents often reflect the important things to people. You know, if you get distracted by something, it's often something that's important to you that you want to speak about, and it's clear that the text here really values that Jewish education. But I want to ask you, before we go into the text, how was that moment for you? Because I hope that a lot of people that are watching It Says What throughout the past few months are having moments like that when they see, oh, this text, I can't believe that's in Judaism, and that talked to something that I value. So as someone who's experienced that moment, what was it like, and what did it open up for you?
I think what was is, and what generally is that you can relate to it. That suddenly there is this feeling in your gut that this is something that is also about me. And what is really surprising is that I don't expect that in a Talmudic text. I don't really know much of a Talmud. I have difficulty in relating to many of those texts because they are legal texts. And I'll be honest, legal type of text doesn't move me at all. I should have had a teacher like Joel Ulrich Rieshever for the whole Talmud, but it doesn't move you. And then there is a moment when suddenly this is important for me. This is something that is talking to me, that I can relate to as a teacher, as a person, as a human being. This is something that asks me a lot of questions about really education and the important things of education. And one more thing, I think that I also said it before, is that they really go into little tiny details. And when you're young, and I guess when I was there at the Limmud in Oxford, I was much, much younger, then you think, that everything is ideas and ideals and philosophy and education is about this and that. And then reading this text, you actually realize that it is in the details. When it is in the details, it is in the details that if a kid cannot come to school because he's living across the river and he has no way of going over that river because there's a plank or there's not even a plank, that's important detail. It's not just about the curriculum. It's also about how you make it available to everyone, how to make it relevant for everyone.
I think that point is really resonant for me, that idea that sometimes we get overwhelmed with the details of Judaism, and people often when speaking to me or others will say, oh, there's so many details, I can't do that. I just like these certain bits, and I enjoy those. And it's often the bits that relate to them and relate to who they are as people. And it's really wonderful to hear you speak about this text being a moment where you see that details are important. Details preserve the rights of these students, preserve the education of these students, which is such a wonderful thing to think about. I wanted to just highlight the piece at the end of the text, which really stood out to me about the immediate dismissal of the teachers. Now, today, that would be unheard of. You wouldn't be able to dismiss a teacher. And I wonder what you have to say about that from the perspective of the Talmud, and how you think we can still get value from that statement today. What value can we get from a statement like that may not relate directly to our experience, because we have employment law and accountability in some way to systems. But it seems that there's a value there that I'd love to hear about.
So yeah, I have difficulties with that part of the text, serious difficulties, because I also think that that I'm not convinced about the part with the mistakes. I think everybody is allowed to make mistakes, even teachers. But I think it also talks about, and maybe that's the point that the Talmud is trying to make, really is about the responsibility. And I think that is what calls the attention, because many times, at least I know in Hungary, that people just become teachers because, no, that's the university I could get into, or because yeah, but that's probably easy. I know how to talk to kids. I have also younger brothers and sisters, and I'm not sure that everybody always understands the implication and the responsibility that comes with this profession. I'll bring you an example. We are teaching in Hungary. We're training high school students in the Lauder school to teach Judaism to the elementary school kids. And one of the first things that we do is to work with them on their basically, on their self-awareness, who they are, and all this. And in the first year, they all said, but what about methods and all this? And we said that comes later, because that's the most important thing when you teach, is that you are an integral person who knows who you are, and who is grounded, who is confident, and who knows what his or her strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that's what it talks about, the responsibility of being a teacher. It also the responsibility of self-evaluation, of constantly supervising yourself. And maybe that's what the text really tells us today in the 21st century. That's not what the rabbis probably would have said, but that's what I say now, that for me, that's what it says. It's not about dismissal. It's about taking serious responsibility. If you want radical responsibility, that's what it says. That's what a teacher should do, taking radical responsibility for himself and herself, and for the students.
I think that's really important. I think hearing that is so important, because people don't often think about, is the teacher a whole person before they're sharing their education with the next person. First of all, I wanted to say I love that idea of the older children teaching the younger children that Judaism. I think that's so beautiful, and I think it should be more common that happens, because it's such a way of building the confidence of people. And I think what's wonderful about this discussion with you is that when a text resonates, and when a text makes you say, it says what, and you're surprised, it flows kind of more discussions, and kind of more oral Torah, more oral tradition comes about, because you resonate with the text as an educator who has experience in this period of time, and it reflects back like a mirror, and we have more content and more meaning that comes from it. And that's really what this is all about. So I'm so pleased that this connects with your mission in life so deeply. I'd love to hear a bit about what you think the other professions, what happens to the other professions. It's a business discussion initially about business owners and making noise and making sure that people are okay and people's spaces aren't infringed upon. And then it comes to talk about the shochet, and it comes to talk about a bloodletter and a sofer, and all these different professions. And we can see that those professions do impact animals or people in quite a strong way. But I wonder what you think happens. What's the relationship between those people? What happens when we raise a teacher to the level of a kind of a shoch, or lower? I don't know. It depends how society sees these professions. It's just interesting to me to see the teacher raised to a person who is so responsible for the lives of the children. But I think it also raises the responsibility of these other jobs that we don't normally see like that. We don't normally see as essential or as high responsibility jobs. So yeah, I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on it.
I think that, well, at the end of the road, I think all the professions have high responsibility. But I think in this world that the Talmud comes to speak from, you see this little Jewish universe where actually, you know what? I'm thinking now that in the old times, in the towns and the villages, the most important person was the teacher, the priest, and the doctor, right? So that was kind of at least in Europe, in Central Europe, those were the people who were kind of like the high society of a small community. So probably those people would be bundled together. And here in this Jewish miniversum, it's the teacher of the kids, the Torah teacher of the kids, and the shochet, who makes sure that there's clean, kosher meat to eat. There's the bloodletter, which is kind of like the doctor of those times, because that's what they did. That was the solution basically for everything, that that they changed your blood. And the sofer, I mean, that's also part of this Jewish universe that makes sure that the holy texts are written with a lot of care and attention, and it really describes a world where these professions make sure that the Jewish world can stand on very stable, firm columns, and that the people in those courtyards have everything they need for a whole Jewish life. So for me, that's what it says. I think that today I'm not sure that I could create such a cream of professions bundled together, that those come really with a high responsibility. But for me, always comes first is, of course, medicine and doctors, and especially in the period we live today. You know how health professionals are crucial to our well-being and survival. I do put educators and teachers on a very high ground, of course, but that's very subjective. But that's an interesting question. Like, who else would you put in this very responsible group of people today? I think that's a food for thought, actually, a question that we can ask people to reflect on.
Completely. I think that's so apt for today. I'm thinking about people who cleaners are becoming so important, whereas normally people see them as people in the background. Lots of professions that were in the background, now people are seeing in different ways, and hopefully, I hope, but I don't hold out hope for them to be kind of more respected and applauded by society in a way that befits those people. But it is a good question to think about. What does society?
Sorry.
Oh no, go for it.
No, just the thought came to me that we're so intertwined with everything that I think actually, you know, if it comes down to it, everybody has a very responsible part because everything is connected to everything. So it's important that everybody, no matter what your part in keeping the society operational, is a responsible job.
I think I completely understand that, and I think that's true. In a world of the Talmud where people lived in smaller communities, you know, it was very clear to highlight who were the people who were holding this community together. But now, in a world of globalization and everything being connected, you know, lots of people are responsible for holding up society, and each of us has a responsibility. We're going to have to end, but I think we should leave the audience with that question that you shared, which is, who are the people in your world that keep your kind of stability? Who are the people who work around you that you may not see that are really important? And I think that's one of the messages from this text. And I think if you're an educator out there, if you're a teacher, thank you, because I think at this moment, keeping the ease and the access of education for people around, people like Zsuzsa, keeping that bridge secure is vital right now. So I'm so glad that we spoke, Zsuzsa. I have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you. And next week, we've got the wonderful Mayan Zik coming to speak to us on It Says What. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful text, I can assure you. And if you're around in the building in London, check out My Black Mitzvah Party, our last celebration of Black History Month next week. And we'll see you then. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Good night.